In this episode of Padaria, I will be speaking with Cortney Worthy. Cortney is a seasoned professional in the world of privacy and technology. As compliance data governance leader at Zoom, she has been leading cross-functional teams while developing data governance and data management effectiveness and efficiency. In this episode, Cortney provides insightful knowledge and advice for aspiring privacy professionals and technology leaders. Here is our conversation. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on to this episode of Podharia. I really appreciate you taking out the time out of your busy schedule and joining me today to continue this discussion. Being a professional in the field, both a privacy leader at Zoom, as well as just a seasoned professional in the field of privacy and technology, it is so valuable to hear your input and advice that you have for the listeners. My end goal for this is for consumers and businesses, as well as any of the listeners that are tuned in, to be a little more informed and aware of the different trends that are occurring in the privacy field, and just overall leave with some more knowledge about the best practices that they can have. Diving into the first thing, today we see so many different trends and developments in the area of data privacy that are relevant to the public. And with increased focus on things like consent and individual rights, as well as a lot of different developments in regulation and enforcement, the world of data privacy is just rapidly changing and growing. So what are some of the challenges that you notice consumers and even businesses are facing today?
Yeah, I would say generally, what are companies doing with their data? So once we use the product, once we use the service, once we, go online and shop, it's like, what data are you using? I think there's a lack of transparency for a lot of consumers. And then after that, what are you actually doing with that? And what are my rights? Like, what do I have? What can I have? What can I tell you you can't have? And how can you use that information? So I think generally it's just awareness of you know, what data are you taking? What data are you using? Do you have a right to use that information? Are you doing that in a ethical way? Which I think most consumers are. I believe they're aware, but I think in terms of what they can do. So the action after the awareness is what a lot of consumers are. I think what's top of mind for a lot of consumers.
Completely understandable. And I know that, with so many different apps and websites and softwares that we sort of log into on a daily basis nowadays, it's super challenging to understand and then again manage consent for data collection and usage across the variety of platforms that people use on a daily basis. So what advice do you have on sort of how consumers can navigate this challenge of having so many different applications that we're using on a daily basis?
Yeah, I would say it's hard. Even me as a consumer, I want to make it easy to use the product, to use the service. So a lot of times it's, providing them the cookies. I want you to let me know when something is back in stock or if I'm looking at like a clothing or a retail line. So it's really understanding as a consumer, like what are you willing to give up in order to get, right? So that seamless shopping and experience or that seamless experience when you navigate an app or the personalization of what that looks like. I think it's up to you to decide as a consumer what are you willing to give up to give. And I say give up in a way where give up the data, right? So it's not like you're giving up your rights. And hopefully most companies are using this information, this data in an ethical way. So we hope that's happening for a lot of customers and consumers, but it's really trying to understand what risk are you willing to take, and what type of privacy do you want for yourself. I think organizations are doing it right, so they're trying to make the product as easy to use. They're trying to make it as personal as possible, but in order to do that, you have to have data, and so you have to have data about the individual person, which makes that personal. And so as a consumer, I'm always aware for sites that I'm not as familiar with or I don't really care about that personal touch or feel, I'm going to deny the cookies, right? But if it's something that, yeah, actually, I want you to remind me or I want to add in a couple of days or even, to be honest, in the next few minutes, then yeah, I don't mind you taking my IP address or, X, Y, and Z to be able to facilitate that experience for me. So I think it's really about understanding what way do you want to consume information? Do you want to have that experience, and then ensuring that you have the right mechanism in place. So if it's changing your password often, if it's using a remote location or IP address to be able to facilitate that personalization, I think there's different options in order to give organizations and customers and your information while also maintaining a sense of privacy as well.
I think that is extremely helpful, especially with sort of the younger generation. I know I don't speak for everyone, but a lot of the times when it's like accept all cookies or deny all cookies, it just all becomes banners and notifications that sort of just block up and take up space on the page. And you're just doing whatever it takes to sort of get that out of the way, get to the main product or page that you're trying to use. So I think it's extremely helpful that you sort of highlighted that it's the experience that you're going to get that sort of is derived from those permissions, and how an experience can sort of drastically change depending on whether or not that data is being accessed or not. And it's just overall a very valuable piece of advice that I think a lot of people can sort of hear and take into account.
Yeah. And I would definitely add on to that in terms of organization and being with the organization, and this isn't my first rodeo, right? So in terms of being able to apply that seamless experience for customers in order to make it easier for you to get to checkout or things of that nature, there needs to be some type of personalization. So like you said, I think it's important to understand like what do you want as a consumer? If you want complete privacy, I think there's ways to somewhat get that, right? But we do have to understand that we operate in a world of internet and data. So just by using or connecting to a platform, connecting to a Starbucks IP address, or connecting anywhere, there's things that you can't control all the time.
That technology is playing such a large role in the developing world when it comes to its impact on individual privacy rights and data protection. How do you see this advancement going? How do you see this impact?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see regulators and different privacy guidance coming to the forefront, especially with all of the AI. I think there's even more importance of putting guidance and ethics and ensuring that we're doing the right things with data, whether it's a customer or regulators, ensuring that companies are doing the right thing. So I think it's headed in the right direction. I would love to see more consistency across the board, because as an organization, sometimes it's just hard to keep track of everything that's going on. And so, like I said, if we're talking about experience and trying to get product out faster to customers and trying to make that experience a little bit seamless, I would love if there was more consistency in what regulators are saying. And I understand that it depends on the geographical location, but I think that's one of the things where I'm hoping that in terms of at least the U.S., we have more consistency. Maybe we have some guidance or a regulation at the federal level and not so much the state level. And then that aligns to actually a lot of the agreements or the things that GDPR and other regions of the world are incorporating it as well into their privacy regulations.
There's definitely so much to sort of absorb and learn when it comes to privacy and regulations. I think it's very interesting that you highlighted all these different importances and nuances that sort of need to be understood and then eventually deployed within products and services and everything like that. Sort of rewinding and going backwards, in terms of your career and journey, what inspired you to pursue a career in privacy and technology?
Yeah, I would say early on, I wasn't sure, right? So this was, let's say about 14 or 15 years ago when I'm coming out of undergrad. My background was finance and data. And so, well, it's finance. So I was dealing with numbers. I was working with systems in order to do account reconciliations. But then early on in that process, or maybe 2 or 3 years after school, I realized that, hey, this big data, that term became a term, right? And so that was like, hey, we can no longer, use access and all of these smaller technologies and tools to be able to drive analytics and to be able to drive insights around data and to be able to use it. And so that's where I think my love for data went. And so I moved from finance to more business intelligence work, where I was creating a lot of dashboard reporting and doing that work for organizations. And I was doing that in a consulting manner. But early on, I realized that there were a lot of issues with data. So there wasn't standards around consistency, the quality of data. And so that moved more into like the governance. And so I started focusing on more of the policies, procedures of how we can govern data accordingly. So once it gets to that data science, once it gets to that analyst, it's easier to be able to create reports, create dashboard, drive insights. And so that was kind of my path from finance into like the data arena. And I would say within the past 5 years, privacy has kind of took shape, right? And so I feel like data governance and privacy sometimes is very, they run in parallel where we can't apply policy and procedures and to the data unless we have a good governance in place. So those rules, those policies and procedures, they're still the foundation of what we know today. Those don't change. And I think the way that we do that and the way that we ensure that privacy is being upheld and that we can make it easier for customers and easier for organizations is to have a sense of what data we have, which is the data inventory. That's nothing new. How that data is classified, which we've added this new term of personal data. So that's just like another tag or classification or category of data. So the foundation of it isn't different, right? That's been happening over the last, I would say, 12 to 15 years. But how we're applying that and how we're ensuring that our architecture is flexible to respond to changing regulations is something that the nuance that privacy brings.
And I think there's so many different privacy professionals that are focused on these nuances that, and especially since it's such an ever-changing, rapidly changing field, it's good to know that a lot of people are invested in sort of understanding these sort of small developments that come together and cause even larger developments, and overall just help to move the field of privacy and technology forward. That being said, throughout your journey, throughout your career, did you face any significant challenges and how are you able to overcome them?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, especially being in the privacy field and working with lawyers, is not being a lawyer, right? And so it's the being able to apply, and I work closely with our technical teams, our engineering teams. So being able to translate a message from like a lawyer or counsel into something that's digestible for a engineer. Okay, so being able to digest that information from like a legal counsel and what the regulation says, which is pretty loose, right? There's very nuances and they don't tell us how to do X, Y, and Z. So being able to take the guidance from regulators and be able to apply that in a way where we can code that into the product is that's the challenge in itself. So I think not having the background of a lawyer, but I also think that has been very helpful sitting in a privacy organization, sitting with those lawyers and having a different perspective when it comes to the way that they're writing requirements. So I think it's been a challenge, but I think for some organizations, it's been good to be able to have a different perspective embedded into the organization, such as like a privacy team, to be able to ensure that we're driving consistency across our messaging across different teams as well.
I do think it's very helpful that a lot of these organizations and companies nowadays have so much cross-departmental work, so much integration of various teams all sort of coming together to make sure that the privacy regulations and standards and proper compliance, everything is upheld, and having like IT teams come together with legal teams, come together with privacy teams. I think it's really good to see so much communication facilitated. And I feel like that can definitely make an organization and company stronger, while also making sure that privacy rights are protected and progress and innovation is still being prioritized. So that's very valuable.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that's why the term privacy by design came into play, right? Because I think maybe at some point, privacy and counsel were trying to control all the rights themselves, but that's not possible. And so having privacy built into code, built into the product lifecycle, I think is key to ensure that everyone understands across the organization how important this is, but also we're building a product and building teams that can be able to facilitate everyone having everyone having a place in the organization to be able to facilitate that to happen.
That's a very valuable lesson. And are there any other sort of lessons that you've learned throughout your career that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think the biggest, if we're talking about personal lessons, I think be very, I would say in terms of like trying to figure out your fit and what you want to do within the organization, I would say just be open, right? Coming into an organization and working with lawyers, that I've never done that before. And so coming in, I was very intimidated, right? To be able to sit with lawyers and being able to have conversations and have those in a way where they were beneficial to the organization. But it turns out that's exactly what the organization needed. Someone embedded that understood that business and could relate that to a technical team. And so I would say be open to new career paths. Always continue to learn. And so I'll say that whether it's technical teams learning more about privacy, which I think is great. There's a lot of resources nowadays where like engineers can learn privacy and learn it in a way that makes sense for them. And then for our privacy team members, learning the basics to coding, right? When I'm looking at something or I'm trying to evaluate or do a privacy impact assessment on a product or some code, being able to understand that code a little bit, right? So know the foundations of what they're looking at. I think it's really important. So I would say be open and then continuous learning. And then not only learning what's in your field, but being able to learn other fields, especially with the stakeholders that you're working with on a daily basis.
That is some incredible advice. And I know a lot of privacy professionals, as well as aspiring professionals, and even just the regular consumer can learn from that. Segueing into sort of the next topic, an area that I wanted to discuss, about your current role as compliance data governance leader at Zoom. So can you just describe what your role entails?
Yeah, I think to make it pretty simple, right? So I ensure that what we say we do, what data is what we do, right? So I'm working closely with our privacy team to ensure what the regulation says and how that impacts the products that we're building. I'm working with our engineering team, and a big part of my job is around stewardship and training. So being able to train and provide some insights about not only, hey, there's a new regulation, right? CCPA changed in this way, but how does it apply to Zoom, which is what they care about, right? They don't necessarily care that there's been an added, 10 extra pages or things that's added to a regulations. They really want to know how this will change the way that I'm working. And so that's really what I do. So I'm a translator, I think, in terms of translating a lot of requirements from our different more business teams to our more technical team. Stewarding, so ensuring that we have the right training, the stewards in place to be able to facilitate data governance, and then building a framework that's sustainable, building one that's scalable, but also managing the different working groups and committees and governing bodies that we have at Zoom as well.
Thank you for sort of diving into what it means to be a leader at Zoom when it comes to compliance and data governance. The other big thing that I've sort of noticed on the outskirts of being like interested in privacy and technology is that there's two big themes that a lot of IT leaders are struggling with. And those two being maintaining data privacy while also being able to sort of democratize the data and making it more accessible, especially with, again, as you already mentioned, recent developments and continuing developments such as CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. There's rights that consumers are being sort of more aware of, including how businesses are collecting and using their personal information, their right to access and delete their information, and then recent amendments such as CPRA. As recent as January 1st of this year, there's been so many different changes in privacy law and regulation that sort of broaden consumer rights, are giving them more awareness of what their rights are. Even where I'm from, Virginia Consumer Data Protection Act, again, of January 1st, even states like Colorado and Connecticut are having very recent privacy developments. And again, more states are having major developments throughout the end of this year and again, early next year. So between all this, actually one thing that my dad mentioned, being a compliance leader as well at his organization, at his company, is that there's a balance. There needs to be a balance of smart leaders that know how to sort of maintain the balance between the democratization of data which is at the heart of innovation, at the heart of development, while also being able to follow regulations. So, what advice do you have for businesses that can aid them to keep up with so many regulations while also maintaining a forward drive that can assist them in development and deployment of new products and services?
This one is hard, right? And I think every company is struggling with what does that balance look like? How to define that balance? And so I think first it's taking a risk-based approach, right? So looking at, this is no different than like our security risk and everything else that we usually do within a company. So having some type of risk matrix or risk questionnaire or something that assesses every new use case that we want to use data. What risk does that pose to the organization? What risk will this pose to our customers? And then how do we mitigate that risk? How do we ensure that we're doing what we need, we're doing what we say that we're going to do, but also we're mitigating the risk of data exposure for our customers? So I would say first, really assessing, developing what that risk appetite is within the organization, developing some type of methodology, whether it's a survey, a questionnaire, or something to assess what that risk looks like. For privacy. And I think for this, we can take a very similar approach that our security teams take in terms of risk-based. They do this all the time when examining kind of the security posture of an organization. And then from there, I've always said that if you have the foundation down packed in terms of where the data is, right? You have a good inventory of the data. You have policies and procedures that are flexible, meaning that we're not married to our policies and procedures. They can change and they're going to change, and we can't be married to that information. But if we know where that data is and we know who the owner and who the steward is for that data and who has access to it, a lot of the other things are pretty new. We can build a tool to do that, right? Or we can build technologies to do it. It may slow down the way that we do work, but I think in the end, it's going to provide our customers, our consumers, the confidence that we're using the data in the right way. And so I think taking that risk-based approach to privacy, but also being able to have the foundation built. I've seen a lot of companies that they don't have the foundation, right? So when a new regulation says that, hey, you need to manage personal data or health data or payment card information in a certain way, it's like, well, we don't even know where that data is, right? So if you understand where that data is, where it's stored, who has access to it, you're able to put policies and procedures on top of that, but also you need to build them in a way that's flexible.
And I think you already touched on this a little bit, but how do you communicate the importance of privacy by design, sort of being able to champion the importance of privacy at the very start of the process to both your development teams and also stakeholders, to consumers who are using these different products?
Yeah, I would say it can't be one person, right? I think the organization has to be driven, and they have to know the importance of privacy. So if there's an organization that's not in that position, I think it's time to move that way. So though it definitely has to come from an organization. It's a business decision to ensure that privacy is maintained for their customers. So if I'm coming into an organization that they don't care, that's going to be hard for me to drive any type of privacy or ensure that our regulations and things that we're subject to are upheld. So I think it's at the top level, we want to make sure that executives know how important privacy is. And once again, I think that's going back to our customers. We're hearing from our customers, hey, I want to be able to not, for you not to track my location, or I want to be able to reject cookies, and I want to be able to do it at any part of my consumer journey, right? So a year ago, I may have been okay with you tracking me, but now maybe I'm more aware of what you're using, or I just don't want to, I just want to have more privacy as a consumer. So I think that's where it's, we're listening to our customers. Customer first in terms of what the customer is looking at. A lot of times our customers are concerned. They want to know what we're doing. And so I think that's the biggest thing. And when we talk about the product and our customers, it's about combining both of them and ensure that we have a good product. And so listening to your customers, ensuring that you have executive support, but also when you get that executive support, ensure that you're doing continuous training. And then your message in terms of privacy needs to be different to different stakeholders, right? So when I'm talking to our marketing team, that's going to look different in training them about privacy and why it's important important, that's going to look different than talking to, say, our security team. Or if I'm talking to security, that's going to be different than talking to our engineering team. So make sure you're tailoring your approach to training, approach to stewardship, approach to privacy with the right stakeholders. And so that's the biggest thing in terms of ensuring that the messaging is coming across in a way that's beneficial to that organization or to that business partner that you're working with.
I think it's so valuable that you sort of mentioned the importance of having consumer rights throughout the process and not just at the start of it or at the end of it, or being able to deny data that's already been collected, or being able to sort of be a part of the process at the start, but it's really throughout the process that consumers, that transparency to consumers needs to be integrated. And I think it's a very valuable best practice for a lot of businesses to follow in terms of having good data governance practices.
And I think it's going to be a real shift because a lot of organizations built architecture. We didn't build it in mind, right? Especially older organizations and companies. So sometimes it's rehauling kind of the architecture, and that's going to take that's why you have to have that executive support, because this isn't going to be like a quick win type project, right? It's going to take years. It's going to take funding. It's going to take resources to be able to overhaul kind of your architecture, to make it flexible, to make it be able to respond quickly to different and changing regulations. So it's going to take executive sponsorship. So I think that's a big thing, ensuring that you have the right executive sponsorship and making sure you have it in different parts of the organization. So I've seen some companies only your compliance team and privacy team care about privacy, right? Or data governance. That's not good, right? In order to be able to sell this, everyone has to have a stake in it. Everyone has to be aware the importance of it. And then moving forward, it has to be at the executive level, seen and driven from them as a business enabler.
And I think nowadays, the important thing is that subconsciously or consciously, everyone does have a part in it, whether or not they want to. They're pretty much part of the process of maintaining that privacy in some way or another. So it's so important to have that cross communication and development in order to sort of move forward in the best way possible. And now, sort of segueing into the overarching fields of your occupation of privacy and technology. How do you see emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and facial recognition and other technologies impacting data privacy in the future?
I think it's just lays a more aggressive need for privacy professionals, and not just privacy professionals in kind of the traditional sense, so not just counsel and lawyers, right? But I love the term of a privacy engineer, where someone has that privacy foundation, so they understand the regulations or they understand how to apply the regulations, but they also are coders, right? So I know how to code, or I know when I look at code what I'm looking at. And so I think there's going to be a shift for more privacy engineers and a shift from maybe lawyers or counsel just knowing the regulation, right? So it does very little good just to know the regulation when it comes to being in an organization and trying to build products. But you have to know the regulation, but be able to know how this regulation impacts the product, how this regulation is going to impact our code. And to be able to do that, you're going to have to dive into like those technical aspects of the organization that I think for so long have been kind of, the engineers cover that, right? We don't need to cover that as counsel, as security, as, marketing team. We have to be aware. And I think that's really important. And I think we talked about that before, but ensuring that you're trained, ensuring that you know what's going on, ensuring that if you're working with an engineering, you know the language that they speak and vice versa. So I think it's just cross-functional and being able to transfer a lot of your skills over to different aspects of the organization. But I do feel like the privacy engineering profession is going to grow and grow at a quick speed.
And I think another important thing that you highlighted was sort of the partnerships between public and private sector, having legislators that are involved and forward driven in terms of making sure that consumer rights are being protected and that businesses are still able to function properly and making sure that there's still progress being made. Whereas companies have that partnership with these legislators. And I think one of the things that actually one of the business classes I took last semester was the highlighting of how it's so important to have public and private partnerships in order to drive innovation. Because once those two are hand in hand and moving forward in the same direction, at least, I think development is just moved at a different rate. It's moving faster, it's moving better, and probably more accurately than it would if it was just one sort of moving without the other. So I think that's super valuable.
I love that point, just because I think for so long we think about regulators, we think about, organizations that are trying to shut us down, right? But I think we need to move into, like, these organizations have, they have our customers in mind, or they have their citizens or in mind. And that's the same approach that we're taking to it, maybe a little bit different. But the end goal is to ensure that we're protecting customer data, and that's parallel, and that's the same for both. And so having a relationship with regulators, both with the regulators trying to come up with these policies and procedures, they should understand how it's going to impact, experiences, consumer experiences, and vice versa. So I think it's very important, like you said, to have these public, but also to partner with regulators in terms of, we want to make our product better, or we want to help you, figure out where there may be some, some of the regulations aren't clear, right? So I don't know if we're going to get, regulations that are pretty specific, but I think this is the feedback that we can start working towards in the partnership that I think is needed in order to be able to have a consistent approach to privacy.
And moving forward, how do you think that user consent will play a role in the development and also the deployment of new technologies and tools?
Yeah, I think that's going to be even more important, especially when it comes to AI, because it's not just using like your metadata, right? So it's actually using content that you're producing, things that you're typing within a search, things that, could be very sensitive and could be very personal to you. So I think going back to what we talked about before, you just have to realize as a consumer, what experience. I think that's the biggest thing, right? What experience do you want to have? I've leveraged like a lot of ChatGPT and things and of training and learning, but I do realize that by me typing this information in there, it's going to be used, or it's going to be used in a way. So I think the awareness of, and I think that's very aware. Like if you don't want personal information, don't type it into Google, right? Don't type it into ChatGPT. So I think that's where the awareness of both the organizations saying, hey, we may use this data to train our models, and the consumer, being cautious about what they're typing. And I'm hoping that a lot of organizations, I've seen it, they're putting banners up to ensure that, hey, please don't put anything personal into the product, because there is a risk to doing that. And so I think it's part consumer responsibility to ensure you're aware of what's being, how your information or how your data is going to be used in an organization, ensuring that we have consent, ensuring that we have notice to do the extra, what we need to do to ensure our customers understand what we're going to do with their data in an ethical way, of course.
And it feels like almost on a daily basis nowadays that new learning language models are being developed, and so much AI is sort of being thrown at us. But I think it's very important to, like you said, take a step back and understand that the data that you're inputting is pretty much what helps train these learning language models and helps make them better. And if that's something you want to be a part of or not, or if that's something that you feel comfortable with or not, is such a valuable thing to be aware of.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to say no, right? You don't have to accept every cookie. When you're on a meeting, you can say, hey, I'm not comfortable with being recorded or sharing something in chat, right? So I think it's up to you to be your own advocate in terms of privacy. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to provide the data that is possibly being used to, what these organizations are using to train these models. So I think it's up to you to be your own advocate in that sense as well, as a consumer.
Looking forward on sort of the future of data privacy, what are some of the changes that you anticipate in these next few years?
Changes. I mean, of course, like the AI, all of that is going to change. And I think it's going to be for the better. I mean, I've used a lot of these AI platforms, and it helps me get my work done, quicker. So I mean, I think it's going to help, but so I think that of course there's going to be a change there. I think in terms of consumers being comfortable with the change, I think organizations have to continue to be very transparent about what they're doing. And then also, I think in terms of organizations, we have to share what we're doing across organizations, right? I think for so long, like organizations have kept how their training models or how they're doing X, Y, and Z, or how they're implementing privacy, very secret, right? But I think as the consumers expect, so if I'm using one product and then I come over and use another product, it's a shame that there's no consistency in how that's going to be approached, right? So I think to build a better consumer experience, I'm not saying share source code, right? But guiding principles about how we will manage consumer rights, or guiding principles around what data we will and will not use for train these models, I think will be very helpful. And I'm hoping more organizations are open to that. I imagine having like, and I know we have like committees and things, but like these larger organizations sitting on boards and committees that are discussing this and discussing with a regulator. So we talked about partnerships with public and private. I'm hoping that there's more committees and working groups and things that come out of all of this work, because you can't do it alone. And I think there needs to be consistency around how the consumer approaches privacy and how they can ensure that their rights are maintained.
I think there's one big thing to take out of that, which is transparency is key for both development, for consumers to understand sort of how these products are being developed and deployed and continue to change. And I think another big thing you touched on was the consistent discussion and the need for a lot more people to sort of just be involved in this process some way or another, to be able to discuss either as a privacy professional about what we can do in terms of having best practices, or even being on the outskirts of it, being able to know, having that shared transparency of how data is being used, or as technology leaders sort of look at privacy by design, making sure that there's some integration of best practices in that process as well. I think it's very valuable. And actually, to mention, my first exposure to sort of who you are and who your role, what your role entails, was through IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And I think one of the big things that I learned at that international summit that was hosted quite recently was, first off, that I was a little bit intimidated by the environment of privacy professionals and leaders of technology, and also like lawyers and all these super seasoned professionals in one place. I think it was, first of all, a great exposure for me to learn, and being probably the youngest in the room by far, I was able to sort of just sit back and relax and kind of just take in, instead of having to, broadcast outward. I was just able to absorb as much as possible. So I think experiences like that, where privacy professionals are coming together with technology leaders, are coming together with lawyers, are super valuable in terms of developing the field. So what advice do you have for any aspiring privacy professionals such as myself, or other technology leaders, people that want to be involved in this field?
Yeah, I would say very similar. Get involved with an organization. If you're just a fly on a room, there's a lot of information, podcasts such as yours, available for wide consumption. So make sure you're taking advantage of like LinkedIn, newsletters on LinkedIn, or resources, or podcasts, or YouTube. And then I would say privacy is a new field. It's an emerging field. So you mentioned that you were a little intimidated possibly, but every lawyer that I've run into, we're all, and I'm not a lawyer, but all of us privacy professionals are learning. And so I think that's the biggest thing, that any day there's something new that's popping up and that's coming up. And so I can't say as a privacy professional, I know all the regulations, or I know, because it's hard. So you usually specialize in something. And so that's why I think in terms of intimidation and being a little weary about coming into the field, I think it's an early stage field. It's early in the field, early enough for you hopefully to understand that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things changing, and everyone's learning. So I think that's the biggest thing. And that was the thing for me as well, coming into an organization that was open to educate me a lot about privacy, educate me about what how the organization is impacted by the different regulations, and then being able to apply my expertise, which is around governance, policies, procedures, the data side of the house to that. And so once again, just be open to new opportunities, organizations to be open about what their organization looks like, what a privacy organization looks like, what an engineering organization looks like, embed the right people into those organizations, be able to streamline a lot of the privacy and the governance by design work that is required in order to, get product out, but get it out fast and be able to do it in a way where it's ethically and where our consumers, you know, we're continuing to build trust with our consumers.
And I think that advice is incredibly reassuring to aspiring professionals in both the privacy field and technology field and legal field, to sort of know that there is a way to be involved that doesn't have to be as daunting, that can be sort of a learning experience for someone that's interested in the field and just wants to be a part of such a rapidly changing and growing field such as privacy. So that's incredibly helpful. And with that being said, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, speaking with me, sort of being able to educate and inform a lot of listeners who might not be as aware of the different nuances of data privacy and technology, and just overall being someone that's sharing your expertise with listeners and the rest of this world, being able to share all of the accumulation of knowledge and information that you've sort of grown throughout your career with is incredibly helpful. So thank you so much. And I just want to shout out Cortney's LinkedIn, which is just Cortney Worthy. And I hope to continue talking to leaders such as yourself and sharing this sort of wealth of knowledge that everyone has to share and to allow listeners to grow intellectually and professionally. So thank you so much.
Thank you.